A dark cabin sways in time with the storm. The air is thick with the smell of rum, gunpowder, and fear. The captain, whose name makes taverns tremble from Barbados to Madagascar, wakes with a scream. But it wasn't a cannon blast that woke him. It was a dream. A trembling hand reaches for a quill and a battered journal. We tend to think that pirates wrote about treasure, but the real diaries, the few that have survived, don't tell of gold. They tell of the cost. Today, we will unseal these records to see the true horror of a pirate's life. The most terrifying monster wasn't waiting in the depths of the sea, but in the reflection on the surface of the ink. Their diaries weren't ship's logs. They were the black boxes of sinking psyches, dispassionately recording the final moments before the crash. And contrary to myth, many captains were literate. They needed to read charts and keep track of their plunder. Their curse was that they were educated enough to meticulously document their own descent into hell. He looks down at his leg. The musket wound he received a week ago is burning like fire. The skin around it has turned black, and a sickly, sweet smell of death emanates from it. Gangrene. There is no surgeon on board. He was killed in the last battle. The captain knows he has two paths, and both lead to hell. He can die in a fever in a couple of days, or do what no sane person would dare. Gangrene isn't just an infection. It's a rebellion of one's own body, a slow coup that begins in a single limb. That nauseatingly sweet smell came from bacteria like Clostridium perfringens, which released gas as they consumed dead flesh. Every sailor knew this scent. It was the smell of inevitable doom. His nightmares were not random. His medical knowledge was a volatile mix of maritime superstition and battlefield butchery. And his instruments, the role of the ship's surgeon was often filled by the carpenter or the cook, whoever had the sharpest knives and the strongest stomach. So the captain wasn't looking at a surgical kit. He was looking at a carpenter's saw and a meat cleaver. In his diary, he doesn't write about krakens, he writes about people. He sees, again and again, the faces of the merchant crew he ordered thrown overboard. He hears their voices in the sound of the waves. This isn't just fear. It's what pirates called sea melancholy, essentially the post-traumatic stress disorder of the 18th century. But unlike soldiers on land, pirates had no leave, no return home. The sea was their battlefield, hospital, and prison all at once. They were locked in with their trauma, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The only escape was the bottom of a rum bottle. Or the bottom of the ocean. He looks at his rotting leg, then at the locked cabin door. Beyond that door is his crew. They are not a team. They are a pack. And a pack always smells weakness. His authority was like the flag on the mast. A sick captain was a lowered flag, an open invitation for any ambitious first mate to raise his own. The pirate code, for all its democracy, was ruthless. A captain unable to lead them to plunder was removed. Weakness wasn't a personal problem. It was a threat to the business. He turns the key in the lock. The click of metal sounds like a death sentence. His tools lie on the table. Not scalpels, but an ordinary knife sharpened to a razor's edge. A small carpenter's saw. A bottle of the cheapest rum, not for disinfection, but for courage. And a pot of ship's tar bubbling over a brazier. This is his anesthesia, his antiseptic, and his sutures all in one. This isn't a surgical kit, it's the toolbox of a damned carpenter about to fix his body like a broken mast. The tar was a brilliant and terrifying choice. It was on every ship, waterproof, and had antiseptic properties, the perfect material to seal a wound, if you could withstand the hellish pain. Now, stop for a second. Imagine you are in that cabin. You have only these items. No help, no anesthesia. Your life depends on whether you can drive a knife into your own flesh and then saw through your own bone, fighting through pain that could drive you mad. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This was the reality these men faced. Amputation without anesthesia can cause neurogenic shock, death from the pain itself. It's not just very painful. It's like the loudest sound you've ever heard, but it's coming from inside every one of your nerves. The key to survival was speed. A professional surgeon could saw through a bone in under a minute. Now imagine how long it would take you. He takes a deep swig of rum and bites down on a leather strap. The first cut is with the knife in a circle. Then the saw. The dominant sound in this scene is the scrape of metal on bone. A muffled scream, swallowed by leather. Sweat blinds him. And finally, the last pull. The leg is severed. Consciousness is fading, but he manages the most crucial step. He plunges a red-hot ladle of tar into the open wound. The sizzle. Cauterization was a deal with the devil. A second of unimaginable hell in exchange for a chance to see the dawn. And that smell, not just burnt meat, but a nauseating cocktail of hot pine tar, blood, and flesh. But cutting off the leg was only half the battle. The hardest part was just beginning. This captain's story was not an exception. It was the rule. Constant violence, paranoia, and alcohol created a perfect storm for mental illness. It was an epidemic that no one diagnosed. And we have a witness, Alexander Exquemelin, a surgeon hired by pirates in the 17th century. He spent years among them, describing their lives with medical precision. His book, The Buccaneers of America, became a bestseller of its time, a true crime podcast that shaped our image of the pirate. Exquemelin describes the pirate's mind as a prison with 3 cells. In the first were the ghosts of the past, the faces of his victims, returning in nightmares every night. In the second was paranoia, the constant fear that his crew would murder him in his sleep for his share of the loot. And in the third, darkest cell, sat the fear of justice. Pirates were hanged at Execution Dock in London, their bodies left in chains on the shore to be covered by 3 tides as a warning. Legally, they were hostess. Humani generis, enemies of the human race. This meant anyone could kill them without trial. They had no safe harbor in the world. Consider Edward Teach or Blackbeard. His famous fits of rage weren't a tactic. They were symptoms. He would shoot members of his own crew without reason, just to remind them who he was. In the most famous incident, he shot his first mate, Israel Hands, in the knee under the table. Blackbeard wasn't just a captain, he was a performance artist of terror. The lit fuses woven into his beard were merely a visualization of the fire that burned within him. But to the crew, a captain screaming at night wasn't a tragedy. He was a liability. A weak leader meant a lost battle and death for everyone. That's why every pirate ship had a quartermaster, an elected official who represented the crew's interests and could veto the captain's decisions. A leader's madness was a direct threat to survival, and it was the quartermaster who could initiate a vote to remove him. A pirate ship was not a monarchy but a brutal republic, where a leader ruled only as long as he was sound of mind. Amputation was a last resort. For ordinary wounds, the protocol was simpler and more terrifying. The wound would be rinsed with seawater or rum, then packed with gunpowder and lit on fire. The excruciating pain was the only known way to stop bleeding and infection. Their medical philosophy was simple: fight fire with fire. This wasn't pirate barbarism. It was standard military practice for centuries. The famous 16th century surgeon Ambroise Paré was one of the first to argue against cauterization, but his voice did not reach the open sea. It was like fixing a watch with a hammer, crude, brutal, but sometimes it worked. In the ship's medicine chest, if one existed, laudanum, an opium tincture, was more valuable than gold. But the most common item was mercury. It was the universal cure for syphilis, which ravaged crews as effectively as cannon fire. They rubbed it on their skin. They even drank it. They didn't know the cure was slowly driving them mad. Mercury destroys the nervous system, causing tremors, tooth loss, memory failure, and severe paranoia. The phrase "mad as a hatter" would emerge later from mercury poisoning among hat makers. Pirates experienced this effect a century earlier. But sometimes, the most disgusting solution proved to be the most effective. Maggots would infest rotting wounds, and pirates noticed with horror that these wounds healed better. They had intuitively stumbled upon the principle of biosurgery. Maggots consume only dead tissue, perfectly cleaning a wound. Today, this is known as maggot therapy and is approved by the FDA in the United States. It was only rediscovered during World War I, when surgeon William Baer observed the same effect on wounded soldiers. These were tiny, repulsive surgeons, working with a precision no human could match. Let's create a credibility scale, or a desperation scale. Self-amputation with a saw, 8 out of 10, there are accounts. Cauterizing with gunpowder, 10 out of 10, a standard practice. Using maggots, 6 out of 10, more likely a random observation than a method. But this shows that their medicine was a mix of brutality, desperation, and accidental genius. Self-amputation seems impossible, but remember the mountaineer Aaron Ralston. In 2003, he cut off his own arm with a dull knife to survive. His story became the film 127 Hours. The will to live drives people to inhuman acts. It's just that for pirates, a 127 hours scenario was not an exception, but routine. Our captain survived, but this is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new, even more brutal chapter. A one-legged captain is a slow target in a boarding fight. His authority now rests not on muscle, but on pure terror. He had to become more cunning, more ruthless. The French privateer François Leclerc, nicknamed Peg-Leg, became one of the most feared pirates after losing his limb. But his story was the exception that proved the rule. For most, an injury was a daily political statement. Every dull thud of wood on the deck was not just a step, it was an assertion. I survived what would have killed you, and that is why I'm still in command. This is how we should view the iconic image of the pirate, the wooden leg, the hook for a hand, the black eye patch. These are not accessories, they are a showcase of endured agony. Each of these items is a scream frozen in wood and metal. The eye patch, by the way, didn't always cover an injury. It was worn so one eye would always be adapted to the dark. When going below deck, a pirate could switch the patch and see immediately. The hook, however, is largely an invention from Peter Pan. It would have been terribly impractical for working with rigging. A simple wooden stump was more likely. Survivors of amputation often suffer from phantom pains, feeling a limb that is long gone. Similarly, pirates, even after seizing treasure, suffered from a phantom hunger for a normal life. Wealth brought them no peace. They continued to plunder because the act of violence itself became the only way to numb this pain. Neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran proved that phantom pains are real because the body map in the brain remains intact. The pirate's brain worked the same way. His map of a normal life was burned away, but he still craved a peace he could no longer achieve. Their greed wasn't for gold, it was a phantom pain for their lost humanity. This is why most such captains met a bad end. The inhuman will that allowed them to survive became the cause of their downfall. Their paranoia grew, they trusted no one, and the crew returned the sentiment. Captain Edward Lowe was known for his sadistic cruelty. Eventually, his own crew marooned him on a deserted island. And this wasn't the palms and coconuts of a novel. To be marooned meant to be left on a barren rock with a pistol and a single bullet. The last grim choice the crew gave their former leader. This brutality was not just directed outward, it was turned inward. They treated their own bodies like broken tools to be crudely fixed or discarded. This was the psychology of survival at any cost. They practiced a brutal form of objectification. The body was just another mechanism, like a cracked mast. If it hindered the Enterprise's survival, it was repaired or removed without sentiment. This is a known psychological defense mechanism for extreme trauma. Dissociation, the act of detaching oneself from one's physical shell to endure the unbearable. Thus was born their first law of survival, written in blood. Always choose the lesser of two evils, even if that evil is a red-hot knife. They intuitively understood what many still don't today. Sharp, unimaginable pain now is nothing compared to a slow, certain death from infection later. This was the logic of a field surgeon. The process is called triage. When resources are scarce, you make cruel decisions based on odds. Pirates were their own emergency room, performing this ruthless triage on themselves. Their second law was even darker. Physical scars can be survived, but a broken mind is a death sentence. Nightmares and paranoia were more dangerous than any storm because they destroyed the crew from within. The crew could see and understand a wooden leg. But the ghosts in the captain's head? They could not. These invisible mutineers sowed dissent and fear. This is why many pirate articles forbade gambling or women on board, not for moral reasons, but because any conflict could ignite the powder keg of paranoia. And from this followed the third and final law: turn your trauma into a weapon. A wooden leg had to become a symbol of resilience, not disability. A hook for a hand, a sign of lethality, not a handicap. Their entire image was a theater designed to conceal a broken man. This is called a dread reputation. Pirates like Blackbeard and Bartholomew Roberts crafted an image of absolute evil so that ships would surrender without a fight. A fight is a risk. Terror is a business strategy. And the Jolly Roger was not a single standard. Each captain had his own logo of horror. Black Bart's flag depicted him standing on two skulls, symbolizing his enemies, the governors of Barbados and Martinique. Studying these diaries and survival protocols, we see not just robbers, but people pushed to the absolute limit. So who were they really? Ruthless monsters who reveled in cruelty, or desperate survivors whose brutality was their only tool against hell? Post a single word in the comments: monster or survivor. But before you answer, remember this: many were forcibly pressed into the Navy. They fled merchant ships to escape inhuman conditions. A pirate ship was one of the few places in the 18th century world where democracy reigned and a black slave could become an equal member of the crew. Perhaps they weren't the disease, they were a symptom of a sick world.